So, who's right, who's wrong? US or Russia? Let's go to Mr. Mankoff first.
Well, look, I don't think it's a question of right and wrong necessarily. I think the Russians are trying to send a message to the United States about what they see as the encroachment of US and Western power towards Russian borders. And I think the United States is trying to let the Russians know that the tactical maneuvers that its aircraft are undertaking are provocative and could potentially lead, deliberately or otherwise, to unwanted incidents and have the risk of escalation. So I think that there's a complex signaling mechanism going on here on both sides, and the danger is both that the signals get misinterpreted, but also that something that neither side actually wants to happen happens. If, for example, there's a collision or other kind of accident.
Mr. Felgenhauer, according to Secretary of State Mr. Kerry, he was suggesting, quote, this is serious business. There could be a shoot down. Is Russia weighing this very carefully when actions like these are being taken?
Well, actually, the encounter in the air was between an unarmed American recon jet and a Russian fighter, so the Americans couldn't shoot down anything. They were unarmed. What Kerry was talking about, it was about a previous encounter between the destroyer Donald Cook and Russian planes that flew over very close, buzzed over. Of course, the American destroyer was well armed and could shoot them down, but the Russian planes actually apparently were recon planes and they were unarmed. So I believe both sides don't really want this to go into a shooting stage, but are showing off. And even without shooting, there are problems can happen. You can just remember the Hanan incident in 2001, a collision between an American recon plane and the Chinese fighter south of Hanan over the South China Sea, which led to a very serious crisis, and of course the death of a Chinese pilot.
And therefore, what can Russia do?
There is an agreement of 72 during the Cold War signed by Brezhnev and Nixon about avoiding such incidents in the international airspace between military planes and on the high seas. But there are no rules. I mean, I can't say that what close is too close. But once a year, there's some kind of meeting between Russian and American military to discuss what happened during the last year and maybe put unofficial rules how to avoid incidents. But right now, when the situation between Moscow and Washington is bad, and especially in the Baltic Sea, where there's a kind of vacuum of power that's sucking in both sides, it could be much worse than a Hanan incident because there's an overall buildup of force there, and there's much less trust between both sides than there was, say, between America and China. So this could lead to an actually ugly escalation if someone just turns the stick just a bit in the wrong direction, and then there's a collision, and then we're in a deep bad water.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Mankoff, at what level was the negotiation, or rather talk, between the two militaries about what kinds of missions and how to solve if there were crises?
As I understand it, the meetings are between the Secretary of the Navy in the United States and then his counterpart in Russia. So we're talking about the political leadership of the branches of the armed forces. And since what we're talking about here is primarily tactical maneuvers, that is how planes and ships operate rather than strategic questions about deployments, that seems to be probably the appropriate level, but especially in the last couple of months where there have been these incidents both with the American reconnaissance plane and, as Pavel alluded to, the buzzing of the destroyer Donald Cook. There's very much a political element in all of this, and so I think at some point, if there's going to be an agreement, it probably has to be one that's negotiated at a higher political level as well.
Yes, that's a very interesting issue, isn't it, Mr. Yang? You are sitting here because you had a very clear memory of what happened between China and the United States about the reconnaissance plane, and that decision was, according to at least the record coming from the U.S. official side, not taken by a higher level of command, but rather very low level of command. This could happen also in the Russia and the U.S. case, some would assume.
I think both Hainan incident and the recent events we have discussed really send alarms to the international community, especially to the major players. Let's set aside about question who at the responsibility of illegal or legal, and how close is too close. The controversial situation is the events happened too close to one sovereign state's border. Although that's high sea or international airspace, that's true. But the location, the points is too close to a sovereignty of the states. That really matter for the security. That is the root for the incident of Hainan Island.
Right.
And if there's something unpleasant happened in the Russia, between Russia and the U.S.
On the Baltic Sea, of course.
I think I think that's a matter on one hand, security to one sovereign state. On the other hand, it's a technical issue. Say how close is close, or how to maneuver when encounter at sea. So whenever we talk about the illegal or legal technical issues, we should take the comprehensive security concept and the interest into the consideration.
Very interesting what you have just said. Let me come back to you, Mr. Felgenhauer. You mentioned during the Cold War an agreement somewhat was reached between then former Soviet Union and the United States. But after the Cold War, we didn't see much of those kinds of agreements, even though tension could also rise at any moment. Doesn't mean that we haven't done that part of the work. What kinds of mechanism is most advisable at this moment, given the fact that the two countries' relations really is not at its highest point at all?
Well, there's right now the good example of Russian and American military kind of cooperating in Syria, basically to avoid such incidents. And since both air forces there are right now in action, it's very important that they don't go into action against each other. And there, up to now, they did manage to avoid close brushes and, of course, avoided shooting at each other. So it can work if there is orders to do it, make it work. The same most likely could be adopted in the Baltics or in the Black Sea, where there's also some incidents of such close buzzing, to avoid possible incident that can escalate out of control. So, but most likely Russia and the Russian military believe that the United States should take some kind of measures to avoid going too close to Russian base in Baltic, in the Kaliningrad enclave, which is considered a very dangerous strategically position because it's, even in peacetime, surrounded by NATO states and basically some NATO forces. So there could be an agreement, but that will have to most likely need first a political decision coming from the top for the military to find a way to work with each other and avoid such incidents.
I see.
Will that order come or not? Right now, no one knows. The situation is building up.
Right. Geopolitics certainly plays a big role, as we all know, Mr. Mankoff. In fact, it is not just between the United States and Russia. It is also between Russia and some of U.S. allies in Europe. The Obama administration seems to have acknowledged the growing and long-term threat that Russia poses to U.S. national security interests in Europe and even beyond. Obama, for example, quadrupled funding for the European Reassurance Initiative from just under $800 million in the year 2016 to 3.4 billion in the White House 2017 budget request. How much geopolitics is playing a role? Can a technical solution be sought when you have huge geopolitical strategic conflicts?
Yeah, I think the growing geopolitical confrontation between not only the United States but NATO more broadly on the one hand and Russia on the other, of course, underpins all of this. That's why you didn't have these kind of incidents in the last several years, even though NATO countries continued to border Russia, and there were still a lot of political and security tensions across those borders. The fact that the political relationship was still in a relatively good place, that communication was still fairly regular, meant that on the one hand, Russia didn't see NATO activities in this region as being as provocative, and at the same time there was less fear in some of the Baltic states, Poland, and some of the other eastern flank NATO allies about the threat that Russia posed to them. It's this changed geopolitical environment which largely stems from the conflict in Ukraine and Russia's participation in it that has fed the concerns of the US NATO allies in Eastern Europe and the Baltics, who have been calling for NATO to pay greater attention to their security and to roll back some of the cuts in a force posture that have been carried out over the last couple of American administrations based on the analysis that Russia no longer posed the primary threat to European security or to NATO. Given that all of that has changed so dramatically in the last couple of years, any attempt to address the specific issues of incidents at sea or in the air along this shared frontier very much have a political and a geopolitical element to them.
Right,
and that
Mr.
means
Yang
also that
here
the
in
United
Beijing
States has to take the interest of its allies.
Right, with Mr. Yang here in Beijing, it is not just Russia that U.S. has an issue with, but also China, it seems, or rather, it's not just Russia that has an issue with the U.S., but China as well. Recently, China denied a port call from the U.S. Side for harboring in Hong Kong. It is part of the U.S. Plan, or rather ships of plans to have in the South China Sea. So there is also a debate about what is international water and many other things related to this. What do you make of cases like this? How should we see from China's perspective the U.S. approach to other countries when there's an issue, strategic differences or strategic potential differences from your perspective, Mr. Yang?
Well, firstly, I would say, frankly, it's an American-style hegemony. When we talk about incidents from here to there, that's a similarity. The similarity is that is the United States that send their strategic weapons or equipments very close to the other sovereign states' border or sea border lines. That's not the other countries sent to the U.S. That's too close strategically. Technically, some reactions may very close to the jet carrier of the United States. That's technical issue. But geopolitically, I would say U.S. now is engaged in 3 strategic campaigns from transatlantic, focus on the Russia and Middle East, Africa, North Africa to Central Asia, focus on terrorism, and Trans-Pacific, focus on China. And U.S. too aggressive, so that they provoke both Russia, U.S., China, U.S. relation in tensions. But I think all the powers are very cautious to avoid the situation from going to out of control.